Chiron. So I feel like I saved the best for last. Chiron's one of my personal faves. And when we're talking about self-empowerment, it doesn't get any better than this. Um, Chiron, the path of the wounded healer. And I've included a picture in case you want to, help imagining. But Chiron, we talked about as half asteroid, half comet. And in mythology, he was born as half horse and half man. And at birth, because of his form, he was rejected by both his mother, who was human, and his father, who I guess was a stallion. Um, Neither one of them wanted him. He was weird, he was different, and they didn't want anything to do with him. So his parents, who should have loved him the most, rejected him on sight. And that became his wound that he spent the rest of his life working to heal and trying to become whole again after receiving that wound. And the mythology says that he was never fully able to heal himself, but he got so good at making himself feel better, or like making his medicine to help himself feel better. And then he started sharing that medicine and teaching other people how to help themselves feel better. So, yes, we are all wounded. We all have pain. We all have insecurities, all of those things. But we all have the ability to work on ourselves to the point where we have something of value to share with other people that can move the needle in their lives. So again, it's like kind of the Uranus, you're really doing it in service of the collective, even though you're pointing your efforts directly at yourself. It's still for the bigger picture of all of us. So we are all the wounded healer, whether you identify as a healer. I know that's a loaded word. Um, Basically, it's all of us. I canceled a wedding several years ago and then randomly was plopped down in the middle of a yoga class next to a woman who was going through this battle of she was engaged and living with her fiance and didn't want to marry him. And she's like, I think I have to, like, when in her mind before the conversation, she's like, I think I have to go through with this. And she and I talked, and all I did was tell my story of how I decided not to go through with it. I decided to cancel the wedding right before it happened. And it was the best thing I ever did. I was so grateful that that's what I did. And she ended up doing it too. She didn't marry him. She ended it because she didn't want to. Her heart wasn't there. So that experience that I went through was huge and transformational for me. But me telling her my story and my series of events became huge for her. And if I hadn't had the courage to follow my authenticity and to face hard things and healing that came with that, I wouldn't have had that story to tell her. And her life, would have went in a different direction. But the universe sat us side by side and made us both show up 20 minutes early and facilitated this full conversation. So when we think about our healing and the pain that comes with being physical, it's not for nothing. It really can help serve not only yourself, but lots of other people as well. So I showed you this. Chiron orbits in between Saturn and Uranus. And we didn't go through the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn, but because Chiron is in between the social planets and the outer planets, the generational planets, they say that Chiron, or our wound, our pain, it links our individual experience to the collective experience. So it's kind of a doorway, it's a gateway. Again, when you think about like your own individual experience of your pain and hardships in your life, Chiron is the transition point that says, there's a whole world out there, and maybe I can do something positive with what I've gone through and use it to help other people. So thinking again about those ripple effects that we are all sending out into the universe, whether we mean to or not. So Chiron, the wounded healer, it spends about 4 years per sign, which again, according to all the planets, that's still one of the longer ones. It is transiting Aries right now. So wherever you have Aries in your chart, that is the house that it's working on for you. And even, your unique Chiron placement in your natal chart, that's going to tell you a lot about the wounding and the healing that you're here to do. But even the Chiron transit, I mean, every single house that it moves over, it will heal And so there are things that bubble to the surface. There's stuff we have to let go of. There's new things that come into our life. That healing process is happening constantly, basically. The Chiron return, this was the midlife crisis starts with the Uranus opposition, the Pluto square in our early 40s. And then towards the end of our 40s is the Chiron return. And much like a Saturn return, this is like an exam. Like your teacher shows up and is like puts a test in front of you and says, here, take this and let's see how you do. During that Chiron return, you will be confronted with lessons and themes and more pain that is like the pain you came here to heal. And in that avalanche of hardship that is known to come with that Chiron return, you get to see how good you are at making your medicine and how much medicine you have stockpiled and ready to use, and how good you are at making more when you need it. And if you've worked on your healing for a considerable amount of time leading up to this, probably it's going to be a relatively smooth process, even if there are changes and transitions. One, you realize that those are only ever for your highest good. But two, you have your medicine right here. So it hurts and you pour that on there. Oh, it feels better. It's like you know how to handle your own emotional pain. And if you do, that's a pretty smooth time. If you don't, it can be a very painful time. Again, where anything that's standing in the way of your healing, whether that is basically the only way something can stand in your way is if you're holding on to it and you shouldn't be, those things have to be removed so that you can move forward and heal. So again, loss around that age, those were the blocks. And I hate to say that, not knowing everyone's situation, loss can be very painful and very personal. And I don't mean to minimize it whatsoever, but especially if you're going through your Chiron return and you lose something, chances are it was preventing your healing. So not that stops the sting of losing whatever it was, but maybe in the long run helps us to wrap our minds around the positivity of those changes that took place during that time. Because that happens in your late 40s, that means that the Chiron opposition happens in your mid 20s, which I think is really interesting and I hadn't really thought about until right now. But I definitely went through kind of the beginning, like the kickstarting of my soul healing process, which definitely has been a process, right around there in my mid 20s. So that'd be an interesting one to look at if you haven't made it to your Chiron return yet at the end of your 40s, to think back to your mid 20s and see the Chiron opposition and the Chiron return are going to have a lot of similar properties. So Chiron in general, in this territory, we are talking about our woundedness. So I do one-on-one coaching containers with clients where we look at their natal chart piece by piece, and Chiron is always at least the fourth session, if not later, because it is sensitive territory. No matter how much healing you've done around your Chiron, chances are when we start talking about it, the last client I did, I told her like, your wound begins with your mom, and she just starts bawling, and I'm like, oh shit, what have I gotten myself into? It's tender territory. And it's kind of supposed to be like, you think about the wounded healer, the whole concept is you're able to help other people because you have compassion for their pain because you've lived through your own. So the more pain you've experienced in your life, I would translate that to the more capacity you have for showing compassion to other people in their pain. So again, what kind of good can I do with this hard experience that I've lived through, whether I'm going to do something good with it or not. We're also talking about places where you felt rejected, insecure, or like you've suffered at the hands of other people. Chiron also will tell us a lot about your early childhood manifestations of pain. And whether you consider yourself as having a traumatic childhood or not, chances are when we start digging around at your Chiron, you experience some sort of trauma, even if it was super subtle. And the Chiron placement sign house aspects can tell you a lot more about the pain that you likely experienced. And then also, any of that pain that you're experiencing, that's the pain that you're here to help other people alleviate. There's wisdom in living through that pain and circling around the same themes and the same concepts and the same jealousy, the same insecurity, the same feeling misunderstood, whatever that is. Eventually, when you've circled around it enough times, you come to some sort of relief. You find a way to relieve your suffering, because as humans, we can't stand suffering for long periods of time. And so that wisdom is what lets us help other people, whether the pain is completely alleviated inside of ourselves or not. We have that wisdom of what we've learned to share. In order to heal your Chiron, it requires us to face our feelings of low self-worth, or lack of self-worth altogether. Basically, like when I started, like mid-20s, I mean, I would say like I hated myself. Like not just didn't like myself, not just didn't love myself, like I actively did not like me. I didn't like my body. I didn't like my attitude. I didn't like my job. My relationship is screwed up, like on and on and on. Life is hard. And I felt like a victim inside of that. Like, why is this happening to me? And the answer was, I didn't believe that I deserved something better. I believed that this was the life that I had, and it was mine, and there was nothing I could do about it. And when I began healing my worthiness and practicing self-love and gratitude and those kinds of things, my life wasn't any different, but me looking at my life was completely different. And I realized, like, my life hadn't been victimizing me. I was victimizing myself. I was stuck in this pattern. And that's where Chiron is kind of like this giant pile of pain that you've brought from past lifetimes, that like little things that you've stacked up over the course of however many lifetimes you've had. And it's pain that hasn't been healed in a past life. You've just been kind of dragging it behind you wherever you go. And your Chiron placement and aspects and all of that tell the story of, this is the pain you brought. This is the pain we're going to work on healing. And like the chick that I sat next to at the yoga class, like, it's amazing how the pain you live, as you work on healing it, you come to cross paths with people who need to hear your story. They need to hear about your pain and what you did to go through it so that they can navigate in their own space. Just like I had people, that I followed before I made my choice, and my story was powerful for her. Again, there's such an element of paying it forward that it's not even about our personal healing. It is truly about mass consciousness healing. And that's where the universe brings us together to have those kinds of conversations. So I touched on this. When we're healing Chiron, we are moving towards healing and wholeness, not necessarily we are healed and I no longer have pain. I no longer have insecurities. Like, I don't personally think that's a realistic goal. I think those things are always bound to come up, and how we choose to deal with them or manage them, that's our coping skills. And those can obviously get stronger and stronger and stronger. Chiron healing, it's a doorway between inside and outside. So again, that concept of taking your pain and your experience and using it to help the world around you. These last few are some things that, learn to recognize Chiron's familiar ache of inadequacy. As soon as I learned about my Chiron placement and I had studied it and whatever, it wasn't even a week later and something happened that triggered my Chiron wound. And the ache that washed through me was so familiar. Like, I had felt it a million times before. And the connection happened where I was like, this is my Chiron. This is my personal brand of feeling not good enough. And that is what this is. And this is the wound that I'm here to work on healing. I'm going to work on it some more now that I'm feeling this wave. And then I'm going to continue sharing my medicine with other people. And recognizing that wave of inadequacy, it doesn't stop it from washing through you, but it does put you in the driver's seat to choose, how do you want to respond to it? Do you want to be a victim to it? Or do you want to know what's going on and know what to do next? My emotions are triggered. When that happens to me personally, I get in my journal and I write down what's going on and I try to sort through all the pieces. And that works for me, or maybe you talk to a friend, or whatever your process is for handling that emotional wave that moves through you. That's that idea of having your medicine ready so that you can help yourself feel better. When we're looking at our Chiron wound, it's easier to guide others than to absorb the lessons ourselves. So when we look out into the world, it's easy and interesting to look at the guidance that we feel inspired to offer to others. When we look at them and we think it's so easy to see that they're disempowering themselves, or like my friend in her marriage, where it's crazy to me that she stayed as long as she did. But when you're on the inside of it, it doesn't look like that, right? And I totally get that. And so it's interesting that I feel so strongly about telling that story, or like in the moment when it was happening, like I really wanted to give her my advice. I didn't. But I also struggle with enmeshment and codependency. And these are things that I'm working on healing as well. So watching her be disempowered in that relationship was aggravating to me on a soul level, because that's my problem too. So the words that come out of our mouth when we're guiding others, almost always, like, it's beneficial to just turn them right back around and point them at yourself and see if you can do a better job of living up to whatever it is that you think other people should be doing a better job at. I catch myself in this often. Two things to practice: vulnerability. If we're not willing to be vulnerable or hurt, then there's no healing that can happen around our Chiron. It's just that simple. Practice wrapping our not enoughness in self-love. So when we feel that wave wash through us of, I didn't do it right, I'm not good enough, I shouldn't even try, blah, 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 whatever your Chiron talks to you about and says to you, when you recognize that that's what happened and use that as a moment to wrap yourself and your inadequacy in self-love that says, I'm here. The fact that I'm even physical means my soul is headed somewhere with all this. And I can trust that. And I know this is a painful moment, but I also know emotions are temporary. So the fact that I entered this painful moment just now means that I'll exit it soon enough and my emotions will resume being positive. So practicing loving yourself through those moments of pain is really the best thing we can do for our Chiron, since maybe or maybe not can we ever actually heal that whole wound, that whole source of pain.